Welcome to the Training Project podcast where health, fitness, and training collide. And each week, I'm just trying to bring you guys real conversations with experts and real people out there doing it, training, coaching, everything in between, and give you guys some practical takeaways to just get better as either a coach, a trainer, or an athlete. And I'm excited to have someone that I've followed in the industry for quite some time, Pete Holman. Pete, how you doing, man?
Fantastic. I'm so psyched to be here.
I'm pumped to have you here as well. And what I want to start out with is probably how I initially came across you, which is your involvement in the innovation and the invention space inside the fitness industry. I mean, you've created and been a part of developing tools like the TRX Rip Trainer, the Glute Drive, GolfForever Swing Trainer. Now I know your main, your baby is the glute slide. But before all that, right, you were a martial artist, you were a physical therapist. When was the moment? What took you from practitioner to really innovator in the fitness industry? And kind of, in my opinion, forcing a lot of people to think about how we train and how we approach training. When was that? What was the moment?
I dabbled with a product in the mid 2000s called the functional training rack. And I was a physical therapist and I could never find any of my stuff, foam rollers and elastic cords and trigger point tools. And so I kind of made this functional training rack that held all that stuff. But the business kind of collapsed. I had no clue what I was doing. I'm a physical therapist and strength coach. Like I had no business background, but man, was it a valuable lesson. But then the next time when it really kind of came to movement, I was training a guy by the name of Mike Schultz. He was a snowcross racer. So if you guys follow X Games at all, or at least you know of X Games, there's these events where you're on a snowmobile and you're literally racing side by side, 500-pound sleds, jumping 90-foot gap jumps and hitting bank turns and all this stuff. And the guy says, "Hey, I'm getting ready for the X Games. I got 3 weeks. Can you train me? I'm up in Aspen, Colorado." And I said, "Absolutely." And he says, I feel my back's a little tweaky. That's my only concern. And, I'm watching his film going, yeah, imagine that. Your back's tweaky, on these snowcross machines. But so anyhow, I'm laying in bed and I'm constantly brainstorming. I'm like you and other trainers. They literally, our clients say, "You guys dream this up at night?" And yeah, we do. We sit in the bed and we think, how can I better, affect my client and get them, maximize the results. So I'm laying in bed and I look at the closet rod in my closet and I'm like, and I've got snowmobile on my mind. I'm like, this guy is going to get an X Games gold. That's all I was focused on. And I saw that closet rod and I'm like, that looks like a snowmobile handle. So I literally ripped all my clothes off the closet rod, pulled it down, took it to the garage, screwed an eye bolt into one side, attached a resistance cord. I'm a big resistance cord guy from physical therapy. I love that strength curve. It's smooth, it's buttery. You can accelerate at the end range. There's a lot of kind of stored kinetic potential energy you got to control and decelerate. And I love everything about elastic resistance. So I connect the cord to one side. I attached it to a ski rack in my garage. I'm up in Aspen, Colorado. And I started playing around with this, almost like I was driving a snowmobile, steering a snowmobile. And I changed my angle from front to back, from side to side. And then, of course, I got bored with that. So I started striking like a martial artist, push, pull, rotation. And after 10 minutes, I was just dripping in sweat. And I felt something I'd never felt before. My nervous system, which is kind of important, your neurology, that's how we move. That's how we balance. That's how we explode as an athlete. It's not just being big and strong. It's having this, like Bruce Lee type nervous system of coiled energy. And I felt just tuned up. And I said, man. So I brought it was like a wood dowel, literally. So the next day I'm training Mike Schultz and I start training him with this thing. And every day, every time we train, we're using this kind of bar with a cord. I didn't even know what to call it at that point. At the end of his training, by the way, he missed a podium by one spot. He was 4th place that year. Next year gold, but that's all right. He missed by one spot and he goes to leave back to Minnesota. And he said, "Hey, Pete, where do I get one of these products? Because I really like, out of all the stuff we did, I like that cord and the bar thing." And that's when a light bulb went off. I'm like, oh. And of course, I gave him mine. I'm like, you can have this one, take it back with you. And then I started to make, it was called the Core 10 Trainer. And then it became known as the Ripcore FX. And then I launched a business around that, asymmetrical bar training, and really kind of created that space in the industry. And then TRX licensed the product for me and my team, and it's now called the TRX Rip Trainer. And this is the product that keeps on giving, Joe, because to be honest, after my contract lapsed with TRX and we kind of parted ways, it was fine, but at some point you move on. And I started looking more at specific niches, and golf is a very important niche for rotational training. Like if you don't understand rotation, coiled energy and balance and left to right dominance, trying to clean up those asymmetries from left to right, then you understand golf. And so a company I was working with called GolfForever approached me, and then I licensed the product to them and helped them develop the GolfForever Swing Trainer, which is now used by the number one golfer in the world, Scotty Scheffler, and a bunch of other pros and LPGA players, and obviously fitness enthusiasts alike. So that was kind of the start, though. That Mike Schultz, that X Games, and just understanding. I think we don't put enough emphasis on rotational training in our traditional training protocols, and we're missing the boat there.
I love that. That's so awesome. First off, I love hearing that story. I did not know that. It's way better to me now too, because I've been using, versions and variations of the Rip Trainer. I used to just call it like the core bar, right? You find gyms, and most times it's like an unused attachment because a lot of people don't understand how to use it. But once I picked it up, I can tell you, I mean, I've been using that for at least 10 years training clients. And, once you guys came out with the GolfForever, the swing trainer, I mean, here I'm in South Florida, probably 60% of my clients are, avid golfers. And, the moment I was like, first off, I'm getting this, they're going to love this. It feels like a golf club. They did a great job. It's super nice. But I love that. I think to your point, I think it's cool because at least for me, I got certified 2006. I'm coming up on just like 18, 19 years as a trainer, and it's just amazing. It's gone by so fast. But I look at, everyone says like, oh, there's nothing new, right? But some of these little tools, and, again, I've tried so many tools in the last 19 years, and most of them just didn't stick. They weren't impactful enough. They didn't necessarily fit into some of my, some of my stuff. But I think, like, when it just comes to you like that, I just think that's so cool. That's such a great story.
Thanks. Yeah. And it is interesting. Innovation is really hard in this industry because if you think about the type of equipment that's out there and how many ways can you push and pull and change elevations, So, I mean, squat cages and racks have been around forever, leg presses, and then hack squats. And now there's belt squats. But I mean, how many, what's new in squatting? And the same for pushing and pulling. How many times can you iterate a lat pull down? But that's what I'm trying to do is bring a little bit of innovation, not just for commercial gym spaces, but also for consumers in small gym spaces, because I think there's been a huge trend. Not everybody wants to be in a 24-hour fitness, which is a phenomenal entity, but it's a massive club. It can be intimidating. It can be too busy, too loud, too much going on. And so these smaller boutique gyms or personal training studios, the one-on-one stuff, what kind of equipment can you bring to them that not only help the clients actualize their potential, but also help the trainers have a better ease of efficiency and effectiveness in their training? And that's kind of what came, that's one of the reasons the Glute Slide is really taking off, is because obviously I'm selling them to home consumers, but I'm also selling them to small boutique gyms and sports performance centers. And a lot of trainers, it's not just an innovation and something new, which is novel for your clients and for the trainers. It's the ease and efficiency of introducing this into your program and your system. So one of the things, we've all done this before, whether it's setting up a plate loaded hip thrust station on the ground with a bench and plates and a barbell and an AirX foam pad and yada yada. I mean, it
It's a
takes
lot.
forever, and you got to break it down. And so literally, as trainers are thinking about this, like, I really want to do it some kind of hip thrust variation with my clients or my small group, but then they disregard that because it's too much of a setup. That's why I created the Nautilus Glute Drive. It's a plate loaded hip thrust machine. It takes 2 seconds to set up and break down. And the Glute Slide, I think, is another along the same lines as far as, yeah, it's cool. It's a slide platform. You can progressively overload the resistance. You can push laterally. You can do adduction, your growing muscles. You can do a hip extension, like a rear kickback. But it's just so quick and easy to set up and to change resistance that if you're training a husband and wife, you can be interchangeable with the resistance and not having to unload weight plates and load them back up. So innovation is great, but it also has to fit into the paradigm or the protocol, or it's not effective.
Yeah, and I love that. I feel like we can spend some time just on glute training, right, in general, because obviously people are super interested. And I think to your point too, I've seen it even from the work that I've been doing the last couple of years with like techno gym and equipment companies, and everyone's trying to also figure out how do we innovate even some of these machines, glute training, lower body training. But if I'm not mistaken, the glute drive was like the first. That was like first to market, right? Of like that type of equipment. Am I wrong?
So Booty Builder had a selectorized um, hip thrust machine.
Hmm.
And so when I say hip thrust machine, an actual dedicated station. And so they had an elevated back pad, an
Yep.
elevated foot platform, and a selectorized way to change the weights, meaning,
Yeah.
weight stacks. You could
Yep.
add plates and reduce plates. And it was pretty slick. But what I didn't like about it was that it was extremely expensive. The footprint was huge because it was all one machine,
Yeah.
and not everybody needs 300 pounds, but you need that variance. So you got to pay for all the weight, even if you're only
Yeah.
doing a 100-pound lift. So the Nautilus Glute Drive was a plate loaded hip thrust machine. And yes, first one on the market. And what I really like about my design is there's an articulating back pad. And there's something about that back pad. I don't know if you've never done hip thrust before. It's like a glute bridge. If you lay on the ground and you just lift your hips up, your knees are at 90 degrees, and you lift your hips up, and it activates your glutes. That's a gold standard exercise, by the way. Anybody that wants to argue whether hip thrusts are valuable, go to any physical therapy clinic across the face of the earth, and one of the first exercises they give you with a knee, a hip, a low back injury is a glute bridge movement pattern to activate your glutes. So it's a tried and proven method. A guy by the name of Brett Contreras came along and really researched and popularized hip thrusts, where instead of just doing them off the ground, you actually elevate your back and put it on a bench or a back pad or something, and that way you get more range of motion. So it really is not rocket science. It's just increased range of motion. Of course, then people wanted to load it up, because if you want to get strong, you have to at some time add some weight, progressively overload the system. And that's when it got kind of inconvenient and cumbersome to set up. And so the Nautilus Glute Drive kind of alleviated all that setup. But the articulating back pad was introduced first time ever on the Nautilus Glute Drive. And what it does is it helps with this kind of hinging motion, and it's also way more comfortable when you put all your weight on one spot on a bench, and it's kind of at the bottom of your scapula, and
Yeah. A
you've
lot
got
of people
heavy weight.
struggle with that.
It's not real comfortable. I mean, the whole movement is, to be honest, is not that comfortable of a move. So you have to be a glutton for punishment, but boy, does it activate the hips. So that articulating back pad makes it soft and comfortable. It's really easy to set up because you're in the up position. Most hip thrust machines, actually all of them, because I've got a patent on the safety catch mechanism, which allows you to have the bench kind of at a horizontal position, so you can sit on there, get comfortably into position, then unload the weight or undo the safety catch, almost like a leg sled. You undo the catches that hold the weight. Then you can descend down versus starting in the down position, which is how all the other machines operate. You can descend down, get a feel for the range of motion, the weight, and then concentrically come back up to position. But that articulating back pad really helps with that. The safety catch mechanism allows you to get up off the ground. And so I've got one in my house right now. I'm like literally staring at it. And I just think it's one of my greatest inventions of all time. It's very simple. It doesn't do tons of stuff. It just does hip thrusts, and it does it really effectively.
Yeah, and I think like to your point too, for those who I'm sure everyone listening is either they're doing hip thrust or they have in their program, like it's just thankfully even, males, right? It's like it's grown so much in popularity. But I think also helping prevent that little butt tuck, right? People are trying to move from the hips versus the lumbar. And there's like, some debate on some people, oh, it's bad, it's not bad. But either way, I think it giving you that tactile feedback of keeping everything in a line and just trying to drive from the hips. So I think that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that. Like there's a male female exercises. That's what social media has done to us.
Totally.
Doc. It's like to think that there's some exercises that are more appropriate or only used by women or men is just asinine to me. Movement is movement, and the body mechanics are designed or function whether you're male or female. So the hip thrust to me, I think what people refer to as the movement pattern. When you look at it from an outside observer, maybe there's some kind of sexual connotation
Oh
or
yeah. Yep.
whatever. But the point is, if you're a dude, okay, listen up. And if you're trying to deadlift more weight, if you're trying to squat more weight, if you're an Olympic lifter and move at velocity, or maybe you're an athlete and you explode through hip flexion and extension, and you're telling me you don't need glute development and glute activation, it's it makes no sense at all. So not only is the hip thrust motion great to strengthen and build hypertrophic changes, which is a fancy word for just building size and mass on the glutes, but it also is a great way to activate those muscles. So a lot of times before we do more heavy lifts or more compound movements, we want to kind of get the muscles firing. So you might do a side plank or a front plank to just get the core firing. You might do a glute bridge or a hip thrust to get the glutes firing. And then you go into a deadlift or a squat, right? Or some kind of Zercher position or whatever it is. But now you've got all those muscles firing around your core. And so, I'm a big glute guy. Like when I was on the U.S. national Taekwondo team and I helped coach a lot of those athletes. And the first thing I looked at with martial artists or any athlete, the first thing is their feet. Can they move their feet? Because that's where everything starts. But the very next thing I look at is the hips. Can they get into functional positions? Can they move through their hips? Because if you watch a great high-level athlete, I don't care if it's soccer, Lionel Messi, I don't care if it's basketball, Steph Curry, I don't care if it's football, Patrick Mahomes, whoever you're watching, watch their hips. Man, they got Patrick Mahomes with his little hip warm-up. I mean, they got hips. They can move their hips. They got power through the hips. And the glutes are, there's tons of muscles in that pelvic girdle that help function to stabilize the pelvis, the femur, and up the kinetic chain.
I love that. And I was going to be where I go next because I feel like I've either heard or read or somewhere as I was, stalking you over the, previous years, hear you talk about the glutes as the powerhouse of the core, right? Powerhouse of the core. And I think you bring some unique perspective from your physical therapy background, understanding of anatomy and movement. So for people listening, talk to us about like what role do the glutes play? Like, what are some of the important movements that the glutes need to be able to do? Because I think that probably, I'm going to guess that ties in pretty closely to like some of your innovations and what you've done with the glute slide too. So talk to us a little bit more about the glutes.
Good setup, Joe.
Teeing you up,
Yeah,
baby.
the glutes are the powerhouse of the core, and they're essential. I mean, if you think about getting up from your couch or from your office chair, what's one of the primary muscles that fires? Your quads, but your glutes. You go from flexion to extension. When you ambulate, when you literally walk to the store or walk down the street or walk to your job, the glute extends the hip. It helps you ambulate. Obviously, jogging, running, sprinting is an exaggerated form of hip extension. When you move side to side, if you change direction in sports, what's one of the main muscle groups that kind of helps facilitate that lateral change of direction? It's your lateral glutes. So the glutes have a huge function, okay? And and then obviously you want to look good on the beach. I mean, come on, you got, it's like you got abs, you got glutes. Some people work on their arms, but they're, the vanity perspective. I think as trainers, we often geek out on the science and the biomechanics. And a longtime client of mine who has just a phenomenal success story, which I won't go into, but he's one of these high school dropouts. He had dyslexia, but back in the day, they thought he was literally retarded. And he ends up being the number one Mercedes-Benz dealer in the world. He's just unbelievable guy. But he would always say, give the customer what they want and you'll get what you want. So, next time you're talking to your client and you're throwing out all this biomechanical garbage of how you got to have functional kinetic chain integration up and down the kinetic linkage and all that, just say, hey, Barb, do you want to look good on the beach for your wedding coming up? We got to do this exercise because it's going to work these muscle groups. And that way you kind of give the customer what they want. But as far as the science goes, the glutes do a lot of things. They extend the hip, which helps you walk, sit to stand, and generate power up to down, and low to high. But they also help you change direction. So there's different muscles in the glutes. And they also help rotate your leg, which is something people don't really understand or talk about. But there's something called external rotation in your hip. And we have the same thing in our shoulder or our arm, our glenohumeral joint. It rotates outward. Well, your femur does the same thing. It rotates outward. And if you think about changing direction, even if you're in the garden and you go from putting weight on your right leg and you're moving to your left, your femur goes into external rotation. You push off the right foot and you start to, jettison yourself to the opposite direction. There's a bunch of muscles, they call them the deep six, in the hip socket that are part of the gluteal group, and they externally rotate that femur laterally. Those are important muscle groups to work. So it's not just about squats and lunges and leg press or hip thrusts. You got to also work the glutes in this frontal plane of motion. And that's where, I think this Glute Slide, which is my latest product, it allows you to work frontal plane of motion, which is kind of the lateral motion of the hips.
Yeah, no, and I think I'm pretty sure I saw, does David Alexander, they've got one down there, right? Here in Miami.
Yeah, Miami.
I think I saw, I mean, obviously, for anyone who doesn't know, he's pretty well known for training like a good variety of NBA athletes. And it's just, at least here in South Florida, well known as like a top training destination, for a lot of people. But I know, I've been following you for a long time, and I saw them put up some stuff with it too. And I'm like, oh, there we go. I mean, that makes sense to me, especially with some of those change of direction athletes they're working with. Like, that's just so pivotal.
Well, and you think about the challenge is we always like to do the movement patterns and the muscles that we're the strongest at, and the movement patterns that are kind of the easiest to get a handle on, which makes sense. I mean, it's an adaptive strategy. Like, hey, I want to, I want to do something that comes easy to me, that I can move a lot of weight, that's not new, and there's no learning curve. The challenge is, and I learned this out the hard way, in martial arts, you always want to practice the stuff you're really good at, and then the other stuff, like I didn't have a good jab punch in TaeKwon-Do, but I had a wicked right hand. So I just, as my coach called me, he said, Holman, your right hand crazy. Like all I would throw was right hand techniques. But I'm like, do they work? And he said, yeah, they do work. Well, anyhow, I dislocated my right, fourth, and fifth metacarpals in an event in Russia. And I mean, literally, they almost came through the skin. It was disgusting. So I had to have that surgically fixated. And my right hand for 6-8 weeks was just I couldn't do anything with it. So I started jab punching with my left hand. And every day I'm like, I got to figure out how I can keep training. And I just jabbed and jabbed and jabbed. And after 6-8 weeks, man, I had a wicked jab. All of a sudden I developed these. So the point is, we also got to do the stuff that we don't typically do. And in the glutes, it's typically that frontal plane of motion and external rotation. So at some point, you got to do something laterally for your glutes, whether it's a sideline leg lift, you could put ankle weights on, whether it's a monster band walk. We've probably all done that with the kind of the cords around your ankles and you're going laterally. You got to have tight form on that. Otherwise, it ends up being like a seesaw. But if you got a glute slide, you can get laterally and you can have a stiff leg and you can do what's called hip abduction, which is just frontal plane lateral motion, or you can have a bent knee and get a little bit of, kind of glute, quad, more athletic motion, almost like an ice skater would be accelerating laterally. And those are really important motions that a lot of people don't train for. And that's why sports performance coaches like David Alexander and we got the Cleveland Cavaliers, the OKC Thunder, we got the St. Louis Blues. I mean, there's tons of sports teams now that have a glute slide because they realize, man, I got to decelerate and change direction as much as I accelerate forward in a straight plane. And so once you understand that, you've solved half the puzzle, and then you have to actually execute on it and work on it.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, oftentimes we're talking about high performance and athletes. And I think sometimes it's, challenging to figure out, what do I translate over to general population? Maybe I'm just an exercise enthusiast. He's talking about training in OKC. That's not me. So I guess like how much and what, or does everything cross over? You know what I mean? Between, a lot of people out there who are probably even more focused on longevity-based performance moving forward. A lot of general population, either clients or exercisers. So like, where's the crossover? Is this stuff still important for them? And if so, like, what does it look like? How is that different than, let's say, for your NBA athlete?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I'm not going to say I train athletes exactly the way I train general population or aging population. Keep in mind, I was in Aspen for years doing physical therapy and personal training, and Aspen is full of ex jocks, right? Like everybody, they're all in their 60s and 70s because it's very expensive to live there, and most people, they don't acquire wealth until This is a good story for young people. If you're 20 or 30 and you're not a multimillionaire, don't panic. You got time, right? I'm still working on it. But you train these folks in their 60s and 70s, and they all want to kind of be athletic. They want to keep moving. They want to live a long, healthy lifestyle and active lifestyle, but they can't do the explosive type movement patterns. They can't do the big ranges of motions that they used to do. They can't do the load. However, the movement patterns themselves don't change that much. They still need to be able to flex and extend the hip and abduct and adduct and rotate. Same with the shoulder. They need to be able to kind of move high to low and low to high, and they need to be able to push and pull. They need to be able to move their feet a little bit. So like people that use agility type ladders, which is something you'd see in the NFL, right? Or pro basketball players. But, if you're 70 years old and you trip on a curb in Aspen or slip on the ice, you better be able to, like a cat, right yourself, or you're going to go down and fracture your pelvis or fracture your, distal radius on your wrist. So you have to have balance. All this stuff that you'd think would be a high level athlete type training protocol, speed, mobility, balance, strength, power, endurance, it just applies to general population also. It's just the magnitude changes, the intensity, the volume, the load, all that stuff gets manipulated. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but you like, look, I want to be a ninja when I'm 85 years old. That is my goal. That's what I'm training for right now. So what I've also realized is that to the extent that you continually load the body up with weights and movement patterns and velocity, you might feel like a rock star now, but down the road, you're going to lose that durability. So what I've done recently to work on power, instead of doing box jumps, I do things like the Concept 2 rowing ergometer. So I can explode through that motion, but it's smooth and buttery. I'm not going to blow up my knees. If I want pulling motion, I'll do or pushing pulling, I'll do an assault bike or a hit bike or a Rogue Echo bike. And I can explode into that stuff and feel like an athlete, but my joints don't hurt after that workout versus doing heavy bench press or pull-ups or all the box jumps, all the crazy stuff I used to do. So it's just finding modifications. But man, you want to be able to be an athlete into your later years. And I think that's going to give you the best function and the best fun in your life. Who doesn't want to be able to run around the beach and chase their grandkids around, right?
Yeah, and I feel like the nice thing is I've never had, even for me, I'm still training anywhere between 4 to 6 hours a day, maybe 5 to 8 clients based on how I'm running it. And I've never had in my 19 years, I've never had clients who were more interested and educated than today, right? I think that they're learning about longevity, power. I'm getting questions about creatine, like everything, which is fun. I actually love it. But I think the implementation of those things is where people struggle. So I'm gonna bring back to that. With that in mind, knowing that where especially a lot of your good personal training clients who, like you said, if we're talking to the trainers out there, a lot of clients are over the age of 40. They've got time, they've got money. That's where life has led them to be able to. And then you have younger trainers getting in. Maybe you're thinking about trainers who are teenagers, 20s into 30s, and not in any bad way, but I feel like the bodybuilding culture around the world only continues to grow. I don't think a lot of people realize just how big, companies like Gymshark have exploded bodybuilding, all these things. So it's a huge youth culture. But like, I'm just most interested in how do you feel about these slight cultural, and maybe it's, a lot of us, that's how I got into training when I was younger too. Like I was interested in like looking good and like building strength that way. And only after time did I start to become aware of like, oh, I might want to be able to do these other things. And so I guess how do we, for like the younger generation and even younger trainers, how do we help bridge that gap where it's not like bodybuilding or functional training? It's like it's training. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I do. And, welcome to my world. It's a constant struggle, and it's a challenge for me because what I see in industry and in social media is that the extremes and the algorithms support this. We all
For
know that
sure.
the extremes kind of get it's the clickbait, it's the abrasive comments because somebody's done something so extreme on social media and they get these abrasive comments and then other people defend it because maybe they can do a backflip with a barbell or whatever the crazy thing is. And so some of these like outliers really get to prominence, where folks, like myself. I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I think I have a very unique background because I was an elite level athlete. I competed all over the world at the highest level. I'm also a physical therapist, so I understand rehab medicine, and I'm also a certified strength and conditioning specialist. So I understand strength and conditioning, and I've got a pretty profound uh, perspective or understanding of the extremes. And guess what? The extremes don't get you to the long game, right? Which we just talked about. The long game is just overall health, wellness, fitness, vitality. It's not being able to deadlift 495 and now you want to do 515. Like, where does that get you in the final analysis? And I always look at exercise in a very simple way as a physical therapist. Somebody comes into your clinic, and the first thing you have to assess is not their injury, but who they are. Why are you here? What are your goals? What do you want to do? What do you do? So if someone comes in and they're maybe a stay-at-home housewife, which is fine, I need to understand that. If they come in and they're a UPS driver and it's the winter in Aspen and they have to do 12-hour days delivering heavy boxes in ice and snow, well, guess what? My thought process has changed around how I'm going to treat that person. So I think one of the biggest problems right now is that we're throwing this wide, fishing net over everybody and not really understanding what each person's individual needs are. And so, whether it's your client, let's say you're a personal trainer and you're looking at your client, or it's for yourself, really think about who you are, what you do, and where you want to be in 20, 30, 40 years from now. I know it's hard to look out. And then dictate or program accordingly. So if you are 28 or 32 and you're into powerlifting and you're trying to do PRs, and maybe you're competing or maybe you're not even competing. It's just for ego lifts. I get it. I've been there. I grew up with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've done more bicep curls and bench presses than anybody on the face of the earth. And by the way, my first rotator cuff injury, my first shoulder injury was doing bench press, where you're supposed to be getting strong and durable and viable. And I actually tore a rotator cuff muscle doing a bench press. So you got to get out of your head sometimes. Think about where you want to be. And then, hey, maybe instead of just powerlifting, I got to do some mobility work. I got to do some recovery stuff. Maybe I want to do a little cardio because, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to have a big engine, not just all show and no go, but I want to be able to have some endurance and maybe I want some power stuff in there so I can explode. Like, that's one of the number one signs of aging. You look at people, they can't move fast. I know everybody talks about losing speed, or losing strength as we age, losing zone 2 cardio. That's what's kind of talked about. For me, it's power. You can't move fast when you get older. You're frail. So if we just introduce a little bit of speed training, and then, by the way, what about balance training? You see these workouts and everybody's in a perfect position with both feet on the ground, doing a heavy deadlift, doing a heavy squat. How about if we split that stance, maybe unload the rear heel, add a little balance challenge in there, balance out left and right. Now we've got balance. So I don't know. It's a constant struggle for me with the clickbait. And I think if you're following people online and they say my way or the highway, or I've got the solution, this is the panacea, this is the magic pill, I would run for the hills from that person. If you have somebody like Mike Boyle, who I'd recommend to anybody, he'd be like, man, the more I know, the less I'm figuring this stuff out. It's really hard. I'm trying to do the best I can. Here's some general principles. This is what seems to work for me and all my athletes that I train. And he says, I'm still learning. That's a pretty solid dude to follow and try to, he doesn't have it all figured out. He's still learning. He used to bench press all his athletes. He used to back squat all his athletes. Guess what he does now? He doesn't bench press any of his athletes. He doesn't back squat any of his athletes. Not saying those are bad exercises, but there's a risk to reward of everything. And until you understand that, you're not going to be able to program for others or yourself.
I love that. Yeah. And you might be familiar with Jeff Cavalier. He's Athlete X, big, I think he's a physical therapist by trade as well. Yeah. But it's funny you say that too. I actually, just recently listening to a Peter Attia podcast who had Mike Boyle, had these guys. Yeah. And so, I mean, for me, what I've been trying to do over the years, although I'm not always good at it, right? Some things we have to make our own mistakes and learn by ourselves, even if we hear from other people, is try to get these lessons from others because same, right? All the non-sexy stuff. Nobody wants to spend 5 minutes foam rolling or doing balance work or hip mobility. It's not sexy, and we're all time crunched. But it's if you want to play the long game. So those are the things I'm constantly trying to learn. I'm trying to instill in clients, even in our newer trainers. And I'm going to be funny enough, at least with us too. There's so many people over the age of 40 getting certified and into the industry. Most people don't realize this is such a huge trend. I see it because it's my business with Axiom. And even from my conversations with organizations like NASM, it's a huge segment. Because they did some other things in life. They realize how much they love health and fitness. Maybe now some of them are retiring and they're getting into it, which I think is great. So they're easier to convince. They're like, Joe, I already know. I know how my body feels. I'm in on that. But the younger generation, even for me, as an 18-year-old getting certified, I feel like sometimes there's the battle. There's going to be the education and those things out there, but these phases of life that we all go through, priorities shift and change. And I think my one takeaway that I got, even from their podcast, and I think and talk a lot about with my clients is, it's at a certain stage in life, and especially for me, young athlete being obsessed with the gym, the gym kind of was the goal, right? It was I didn't have all these other things in life. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a business I was growing.
It was so easy, wasn't it?
Oh, bro. And then you get these things and you're like, hey, I'm actually I need to be functional outside of the gym. I need to not be so sore from my training that I can't just go have fun and play. Things those priorities. There's just a rhythm of life that forces you into it as well.
Absolutely. And listen, I've got a daughter who's an elite level volleyball player. So she plays in Division I program, and for years, I tried to get her to work out. She finally started working out. And then, it's really hard when you're a pro and you think you know it all, at least, because you've been doing it. And I'd watch her workouts with her other coach, and they were good. They were solid. But I noticed, man, she doesn't do a lot of core stuff. It was a lot of the bigger, sexier stuff. And they would do a core movement here and there, but I'm like, this girl is a rotational athlete. All she does all day long is jump, rotate violently, and whip through and try to decelerate. And so, it's a lot of stress. Sure enough, she hurt her back. And it was a pretty bad back injury. And so she had to take 3 months out of the middle of her season, it was off-season training when you're trying to get better. 3 months, no activity. And so after that, I started rehabbing her, and she kind of saw what I was doing. And I brought out my spine model, and I showed her what a pars defect is. We don't need to get into that. But, what's going on with some hypermobility in her spine, and why when she goes into extension and rotation that she can be damaging some of those muscles or some of those vertebra, facet joints, ligaments, and bones themselves, and how the core actually helps decelerate and maintain your position, and it will actually help give you power too. So anyhow, until she was injured and had 3 months off, she didn't buy into it. Then after she came back, she kind of was like, "Oh, Dad, can you show me something else?" And I'm like, "Wait, what? You actually want to work out with me?" And then the next thing you know, her back stopped hurting. She got stronger, more powerful, and she's now, in full season playing and scrimmaging, not starting yet, but she's, a young progressing athlete, but she's pain free. And so some of it, the point is, sometimes you can lead a horse to water, but until they get really darn thirsty, they're not going to take a drink. So I don't know. That's how it is, man.
Nothing teaches you like an injury. That's for damn sure. I mean, I've seen it with my clients, with myself, all these things. I think the coolest part with that too, and for me, it's super relevant because I've got 6 and 7-year-old daughters, and I'm trying not to be like the psycho trainer dad, right? I'm like letting them be kids, like just let them enjoy movement, exercise. Like we're so active, it's great. But I had some questions even from like one of my clients, because one of my daughters, and you'll appreciate this. You're my PT guru. I'm like, she's had some hips, like little like random like hip pain occasionally. And for a kid, I pay attention to that stuff. Try not to make too big a deal out of it, but I'm like, all right, yeah, let me watch that. And then all of a sudden, like rolls her ankle on that same side, and I'm like, there's something going on there. There's a connection. I know it. And so, I found a great local pediatric physical therapist. And I'm like, you know what? Like the best thing I can give her is like an understanding of her body as she gets older. And like, if I can see some things now, and even like, the thing that people I think take for granted is like little kids are so smart, like my little 6 and 7-year-old girls, they probably know more muscles than most adults do in their body. They love learning about it. They talk about their muscles without being crazy. But for me, I mean, I found a great cash practice PT, significant money to have her even just for a couple of sessions. And I remember some of my clients like, man, that's crazy. Like she's only 6. And I'm like, hey, I mean, if I can help her with what I've dealt with in my life, because my parents didn't know any better, like, why would I not do that?
Yeah. And it's kind of a travesty, and I don't want to get on a soapbox, but I'll just briefly mention our society does certain things pretty well. And certain things we really miss the boat. And one of them is, I think, our health education in schools. I remember back when I was in high school, we had like one semester of health education, and it kind of focused around maybe contraceptive. And I'm not saying they even do
totally.
that
That's all I had. It's just
total like lightning rod.
Yep.
But the point is, the fact that you go through educational systems for years and you don't learn about your body and how it works and how to provide proper nutrition and diet and exercise and how important that is throughout the lifespan. And then the other one is unrelated, but kind of related to any fitness entrepreneur out there, is how to deal with your money. You know, I went through
Totally.
graduate school. You think they had one course on business development or financial management or how to launch your own physical therapy clinic? Nothing. It was all just X's and O's about how to practice and manual therapy and diagnostics and assessments. And that was great. But then what? I'm just going to work for Health South for the next 40 years and retire? You know, what if I want to do something with my own money or my own business acumen? And so, anyhow, those are two things I think we're missing is the business and the finance understanding in our educational model, and then also the health. Like, and maybe it's, I don't know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm sure Big Pharma does not want you learning about your health when you're 7, 8, 10, 12 years old. They want you to be a dumb sheep and be hooked on 3 or 4 different meds by the time you're 60 years old.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
saying.
yeah. No, I'm with you on there. We could have a whole separate episode on that one day.
Yeah, right.
But you know, and on the flip side, I think the cool part for the fitness and training side, because you know, I'm a real for anyone listening who is a trainer thinking about being a trainer, like I'm such a believer that you know that we are the preventative path for people in our lives, like to be that resource for them. I think more the need for more coaches is only going to increase over the next couple of decades with technology and everything else. But the thing I love, most people don't know even NASM specifically has gone big into high schools. They hired an entire team of like staff on the educational side to create more. And thankfully, I'm actually around here, a couple here in South Florida, where these high schoolers are not only going through like, let's call it junior and senior classes, learning about exercise and training, they can select, but they can get certified as like seniors in high school. And I'm like, man, I would have loved that as a high schooler. So
Is that
there's
through, wait a
pockets of
minute, is
people.
that through like an adjunct campus or is that part of every high school program?
Not every high school program, like certain you know, certain districts and or just certain schools have, you know, are opting into it. You know, for example, there's just a couple schools here in Boca, not all of them, right? So it's not everywhere, but you
Right.
know, they can develop this relationship, and NASM is essentially you know, allowing and providing the content for them to teach and make it more hands-on. I mean, I'll give you just a quick example. You know, Boca West here in Boca Raton, one of the high schools not far from here, for a couple things. Like they've been having this program for a few years, and then you know they got lucky. They well, not lucky. They did well. They won the state championship in football last year. And I'm telling you, I'm going to send you pictures of their weight room. Their weight room looks like a D1 collegiate. It is
I love
insane. I'm
it.
so jealous. But I mean, the cool part is there's pockets of schools doing it, but to your point, systematically, you know, we're not. But I mean, hey, maybe that's where people like you and I and those listening to the podcast come in and just try to impact the people around you.
Yeah, it's such a worthwhile venture. And you know, you mentioned you've got folks that are even into their late 30s, 40s, or even 50s that are now showing some interest in personal training. And I thought, what an organic, authentic message that sends to a potential client. Like, hey, I'm Bob. I was on Wall Street, and you know what? I was losing my hair, and had high blood pressure, and I the only thing that made me feel good was getting to the gym. You know what? I'm not on Wall Street now, and I want to provide that same gift of health and wellness and vitality to people all over my community. I mean, that is a powerful message. And to your point, there's nothing more valuable. This is for all those trainers or coaches or Pilates instructors, or you know, if you're serving the health and wellness industry, you are doing God's work. There's nothing more valuable than giving somebody the gift of health and longevity so they can enjoy their lives. And I'm telling you, man, I lived in Aspen for off and on for 2, 3 decades, and I've rubbed shoulders with billionaire after billionaire. And once you have, I'm not talking about like money's important, don't get me wrong. But once you have a certain amount of money, you know, if you got $1.5 million, 3 million doesn't like totally change your life. If you got 10 million, 15 million doesn't. If you got 100 million, 300 million, yeah, maybe you got a nicer Gulf Stream, or you can fly private all the time. But once your health goes, I don't care how much friggin' money you have, it is gone. And I've seen it firsthand, and it's pretty eye opening, because what happens is when you get used to relying and leaning on your finances, because you know you can buy your way out of a lot of stuff, but you can't buy your way out of health. And that's why it's so empowering. And that's why people that do have a consistent, healthy routine, from their sleep to their diet to their exercise programming to even how they detox their stress and mitigate all the apps and all the blue light and all that stuff going on, those people are the ones that have the most vivacious lifestyles and are well adjusted and live a long, healthy lifespan. And again, you can't buy your way out of that. So it's great. It's a great equalizer. You walk into the gym and it's like, man, I earned this. I don't care if you're lifting, if you're squatting 10 pounds or 100 pounds or 250 pounds, you earned every pound that you were able to move, and you can't buy your way into that. So God bless the trainers. God bless the fitness enthusiasts that are doing this. And then if you want to get involved in this career, this line of work, Joe's your guy.
I'll take it. I'll take that plug. Well, I mean, again, as we were talking before we got onto record here on the podcast, this was an overdue conversation. I feel like the nice thing, for all the bad things about social media for people and how it affects them, for me, I can usually pick up on my people, right? Like my people who are out there doing great work, whether it's in the industry or just supporting health and fitness. And I love the message you put out. I love your energy and your passion, your enthusiasm for this. I think people need to be around that more. And for those that do want to, those that maybe this is their first interaction and hearing you talk, where are you most engaged and active? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm most on Instagram right now, which kind of, it's meta. It links to Facebook, but Pete Holman 1, the number 1, Holman, Pete Holman 1. I'm on Instagram. It links to my Facebook. I'm also on LinkedIn, and you can find me. My website is ph1performance.com, ph the number 1 performance.com, and that kind of has a nice summary of all my products that are out there and links to that. And by the way, if you are in the industry, or even if you're a fitness enthusiast and you have questions, hit me up. I love talking about this stuff. I'll answer them the best I can. And I especially have a soft spot for trainers that are trying to become entrepreneurs, because it's not easy. But don't forget, you're not a businessman. You're a business man, as Conor McGregor once said. I love that quote. You got to build your own brand. You got to be an entrepreneur, and you got to have that mindset. It's not all about money, but when it comes to supporting your family and paying your mortgage, like, you have to make your money. And one tip I always tell if you're a trainer out there and you're listening, do this. Mark my words, it'll change your life. Here's the tip of the day. Every year, I don't care if it's the end of the year or the start of the summer, but whatever, usually first of the year is a good time, raise your rates. Now you might think, oh gosh, I don't know, geez. Every year inflation goes up 3 to 5%. You cannot maintain or keep up with inflation unless you raise your rates every year. And by the way, if you go from $75, or I'm just making this up, I don't know where you live, an hour, to $80 an hour, and you lose a client, bye-bye. Have a nice day. Go enjoy your Starbucks, because I'm giving my all every time I see you. I'm programming, I'm cheerleading, I'm sending you texts about, did you have your kale salad with salmon today? And if that's not worth $5 to you, you open up a spot for a new client that will really appreciate you. So raise your rates every year, folks.
I love that. I love that message. Well, Pete, I appreciate you, brother. I have no doubt that we're going to, hopefully cross paths again soon, hopefully in person. But if not, then I look forward to having you back on the podcast.
Absolutely, my man. Thanks so much for your time, and God bless.